and went to Hopkins for undergrad, and where she studied biomedical engineering and applied math. And she then went on to do PhD in computational biology at WashU, in my lab in PhD actually. And then she has been the clinical genomics product specialist and team lead in asset product development in PierianDx, which is a genomic company. And she's doing a lot of new hobbies now, and ukulele, mountain biking, aside from the science and working. So welcome, Sohini. And maybe if you can tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously I know your PhD training, but for everyone here about your PhD training, how that led to your interest in biotech and how that led you to decide to apply and then get into your current role. That'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Quan, for that intro. And also thank you to the two moderators and giving us the opportunity to speak today. But as Quan said, my PhD training was at WashU in computational biology. So most of my work was bioinformatics, and I was in Li Ding's lab, who we mostly study cancer genomics in that lab, and mainly computational methods and analyses, taking in all sorts of sequencing data from DNA to RNA to proteomics, and integrating all those omics and trying to uncover kind of what are the driving forces in cancer, like the driver mutations or the druggable mutations in cancer, and really analyzing large-scale data sets, such as the Cancer Genome Atlas data sets, as well as RNA-seq data and proteomics data from CPTech, mass spec data. And specifically, my PhD dissertation and thesis was regarding combining and creating computational methods to uncover different driver mutations and druggable mutations using particularly protein structure, kind of the 3D structure of protein, like how, you know, if we take mutations across multiple cancer patients and display them on the protein structure, finding out where the hotspots are on the protein structure, and if we're clustering these, if that can give indication of whether those are driver mutations, like kind of the chemistry of those amino acids, how close are they to functional sites. So a lot of my PhD thesis surrounded creating different algorithms, one algorithm like Hotspot 3D, as well as a machine learning algorithm to kind of help that process. So a lot of my PhD work was focused on computational analysis, data analysis, building algorithms. And from there, I did a short postdoc in the lab as well. It was about a year until I decided to look for jobs. And there was specifically one company here in St. Louis, which is the company I'm part of, called PierianDx, that is very similar to kind of what I was interested in terms of precision medicine. Like here, this cancer patient has this particular mutation. What kind of drugs do you give that cancer patient based on their genotype? So a lot of what PierianDx does is it's a clinical genomics service company where we have like a knowledge base and this web interface where we take our clients are hospitals and medical centers where we sequence cancer patients, their sequencing data. We take that data and then we transform it and we feed it into our flagship product called Clinical Genomics Workspace in our knowledge base. And it will give you reports about what are the druggable mutations, what are the actionable mutations. So that's kind of what our company does. And that was very in line with what I wanted to do. I really wanted to be more on the clinical part of it and actually helping patients directly. So that kind of played into my decision to go to industry and play a little bit more direct role in helping out cancer patients. So that's kind of, and it was very cool because that was a company that was located right here in St. Louis, and it was very much in line with what I wanted to do. And it's a small startup company, so we're very small, and they were looking for scientists in their product development department. And so that's where I joined as a scientist and team lead as part of the product development. Is that good to start with? I want to give everyone else a chance to talk.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sohini. That was a great introduction. And, you know, we can follow more questions. And next, I think I will introduce our next panelist, who is Jeanette. And so Jeanette received her PhD in the molecular genetics and genomic program, also at WashU, and completing her thesis in the prestige Jeff Gordon's lab, repairing gut microbiome maturity in undernourished children. And as a scientist currently in Siolta, I might mispronounce the name, Jeanette can correct me, Therapeutics, she's working on optimizing gut microbiota development in infants and children to prevent allergic disease. Jeanette's notable anecdote is that she won an achievement award in grad school for accidentally generating 30 million files in a single directory and shutting down the cluster. I actually never knew this. I guess you might have not met Ian and learned from him back then. So yeah, I think we'll let Jeanette introduce herself briefly about her PhD and why she became interested in her current company and how she landed on her current job.
Cool. Thank you, Quan. And yeah, thanks again to the organizers for putting this on. I think this is really cool. And I wish I had more of this when I was starting out my PhD. So for my PhD, as Quan mentioned, I was in Jeff Gordon's lab. And Jeff is really one of the leaders in the gut microbiome field. And he has a massive lab. And the lab has sort of two main focuses. So on one side, there's the sort of microbiome obesity research. And then the other side is microbiome in relation to undernutrition or malnutrition. And so I chose the undernutrition side. And so essentially with my project, I started out trying to understand what normal, healthy gut microbiota development looks like. So essentially, looking at birth cohorts of children across the world and seeing how the bacterial composition in the gut microbiota changes over time, and then comparing different populations and essentially trying to understand, which bacteria are the main players, to understand which bacteria are most likely contributing to, normal, healthy growth and development. And then from there, we focused on undernourished children. So, switching over to children that don't have healthy growth, we looked at how their gut microbiota differed. And then from then, we tried to sort of bridge that gap. So what that meant was essentially, trying to replace those very important gut microbes that were missing in children that were undernourished, either by directly adding in those microbes, or we later focused on specific food interventions. So looking at what we called microbiota-directed therapeutic foods, specifically for when children are first weaned off of breast milk and start eating complementary foods. We wanted to know, which specific foods could boost the representation of these healthy gut microbes. And so my project involved, everything from anaerobic microbiology to mouse experiments to notobiotic piglet experiments. We also did a lot of data analysis. So sort of like full circle, beginning with the human population. And then we actually sort of ended up going back into a human population to test some of our microbiota-directed therapeutic foods that from our preclinical studies had been shown to be most effective. And so towards the end of my PhD, really throughout grad school, I knew that I didn't want to stay in academia. And I, being in Jeff Gordon's lab, I learned a lot about the gut microbiome, and it's a very new, exciting field. And so I was interested in staying in that field, which I think for me, I was pretty lucky to get my PhD in the microbiome world, because it made the transition to industry a little easier, since I wasn't really switching fields. And so at the end of my PhD, I was looking for, essentially just looking on LinkedIn for different, microbiome related positions in industry. And I knew I was going to San Francisco. And so, really for the microbiome field and industry, there's Boston and there's San Francisco, which are really like the two main hubs. And so, you know, I had a couple of good options, you know, some interesting jobs. And I ended up just like reaching out, you know, if there were open positions, I would just sort of email, and having Jeff Gordon as my advisor was a huge advantage because his name is well known in the field. So I think that helped open some doors for me. But essentially, I found a job posting for this company called Siolta Therapeutics, which is the company I'm now working for. But it's essentially now a clinical stage biotech company that is leveraging the gut microbiome to eventually prevent allergic disease in children. And so I really liked the microbiome aspect. And I also like the disease prevention aspect. I feel like, you know, if you can prevent a disease instead of having a disease manifest and then treating it, that, you know, that's the ideal scenario. And I also like that sort of early intervention. You know, my PhD research was in babies up to, you know, 2 to 3 years. And I think that's really when you have to intervene, especially with the gut microbiota. And so I really liked that sort of early life intervention. But just, you know, this is applying microbiome research to a different problem, allergic disease instead of undernutrition. So, you know, I would still be learning more about immunology and that sort of thing. And so, you know, I interviewed at Siolta and got the position. And now I've been there for almost 2 years, and I'm currently a scientist there, but really I do a little bit of everything. So in a sense, it's sort of similar to my PhD, you know, spanning clinical sample analysis, preclinical mouse models, doing a lot of bioinformatics analysis. So I think it's been a really fun transition, and maybe it wasn't too shocking for me because it sort of has a similar feel to academia, even though, you know, it's in industry and in a biotech company. So yeah, that's I'd be happy to address more things specifically later, but that's it for now.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was very helpful, and great to know that you're out in a very startup-like environment. Probably that's more like academia. And so lastly, I want to introduce Ian. And Ian went to a computer science PhD program at WashU, but he did a lot of biomedical entrepreneurship stuff, which I believe you'll hear to him about. And he's currently the director of product engineering at Cofactor, where he leads the development of clinical tests that characterize the immune system and predict response to immunotherapy, which is a lot of what we aim to do as well. And one of his proudest accomplishment, maybe, or fun fact, is that it took him 3 years to beat his advisor in foosball. Kind of jealous of that. I don't know how it fared against me. But yeah, so Ian, maybe we should let you introduce yourself, how you get there. I think Ian probably has a very full experience of entrepreneurship that, you know, inform his current decision. So it would be great to hear about him.
Absolutely. Thanks, Quan, and thanks everyone else. Yeah, I had sort of a pretty alternative maybe path through the PhD system, and also I think in this group of folks I'm maybe a little bit different. But I out of undergrad I worked at a next-gen sequencing boutique and was really interested in how science PhDs are running the business. So I thought I wanted to learn how to do that. But I actually thought the PhD was the best way to do it because I was really interested in how the founders were able to think analytically about their problems, whether they're business problems, customer problems, whatever. So I went to WashU and got a PhD in computer science. That's what I did in undergrad. It's in computer vision. It was a cool area and a fun field, and I found a good PI and a nice project. So it was fun. But a lot of the sort of training also I had outside of the PhD. So we had this med tech company incubation accelerator hybrid thing that called Sling Health at WashU that helped students solve clinical problems by giving them money, tools, expertise, etc. So that was really formative. But and so there I got a lot of opportunity and exposure to thinking about clinical problems, biomedical problems, how to understand them, and how to understand how people felt the pain points, and how to really bridge the gap between that market need and some technology that might give some competitive advantage. So I think in my mind, that's the best way to describe products. So if you're really interested in understanding like what is a product manager, or what is a director of product engineering, it's really that connection between the science, the business, the technology, and the customer problem ultimately. After school, I did a few of my own gigs, started trying to work on my own problems. I came across my current role because, through the boring networking thing, I had been keeping in touch through my PhD with the CEO of the company that I did my post-bac at. And so I knew that they just did an A raise and that they're looking for a product manager. So I put in my CV and had to go at it. So that's how I ended up at Cofactor Genomics. And we're also very small. We're about 11 people. Started out of St. Louis. So we have our clinical cap lab in St. Louis. And then the product sort of software engineering executive team is out here in San Francisco, California. In terms of my role, I alluded a little bit to product. In a small company, it really means you're doing everything. As an example, so our product right now that we're focusing on is as Quan had introduced, is a clinical test that physicians might use in order to determine if their patient would respond to anti-PD-1 therapy, which are things like, Keytruda is the very popular, and pembrolizumab, which has really revolutionized oncology. So in creating that, it's my role to make sure that our report is interesting, that the boxing of our reagents are reasonable, that the reagents are going through a GMP process, that we're following regulatory guidelines, that our pipelines are reproducible, that our wet lab has the proper QC metrics, but all those sort of high level things and bringing everything together. So it's a little bit about product and what I do, and I'm happy to continue discussion in any way that you guys want to.
Thank you, Ian. So thanks again to Sohini, Ian, and Jeanette. And so I think following Eugenio and Giovanni has, I think, questions that many trainees might have. And then I think participants also feel free to chat your questions. We have, a few questions that hopefully address many people's concern, but you have other questions, feel free to bring it up. And I think Eugenio and Giovanni will get to it. So I should let Eugenio and Giovanni lead the discussion on this, and the panelists feel free to jump in if you feel like you're ready to answer, etc. Thank you.
So thank you, Quan, and thank you, our guest, for your presentation. So I think, Giovanni, you could go with the first one.
Yes, sure. My question would be, how different was academia from what you're doing now in biotech? You think it's too much difference? I remember Jeanette saying that her position now is very similar to her PhD, but in which ways it's different?
Yeah, I can start. So for me, my company is, a pretty small startup company. So it was founded about 3 years ago. So when I joined, it was a pretty new company, and we're also part of an incubator. So we share space with a lot of other startup companies. And that sort of makes it easier for companies that are just starting out. They don't have to invest in all this expensive equipment right away. They can sort of just pay rent and then share the equipment with other people that need it. So for me, that the feel of being in a building with other companies sort of felt like being in academia with a bunch of different labs around, working on different things. And there are also within the incubator that we're in, it's we have like lunch seminars where different companies talk about what they're working on. And so there's an emphasis on the science, since it's a lot of other biotech companies in the same space. So I think in that sense, it's very similar, sort of feels like a lab. But I think the differences are in sort of the end goals, or the like what at the end of the day, what is the goal? So in academia, for a PhD student, at the end of the day, you needed to publish a peer-reviewed paper. So the end goal is making unique discoveries that can contribute to the body of scientific knowledge. Whereas in biotech, for a company, at the end of the day, you want a product that works. And so in Siolta's case, we're developing live biotherapeutics. And so that essentially means, in our case, it's a consortium of gut-derived microbial species. And we're actually going the drug route. So, we have to do clinical trials. We have to get FDA approval. And so in that sense, there's a lot more sort of regulatory hurdles we have to jump over. And then also this is something I sort of have to remind myself of, but, you don't have to answer every question. Like for us, maybe we don't know the exact mechanism of our live biotherapeutic. And, sometimes we can just leave it at that because the FDA doesn't always require a mechanism. So that's something that I think is a little bit different, within industry.
And to kind of extend off of what Jeanette said, she had kind of touched on like the goal in academia is to publish papers, but in industry, like she mentioned, that the goal is slightly different. And specifically for my team, to go a little bit more specifics of what my team does. So there's several departments in PierianDx. We have like a customer support side, customer facing, where customers using our product, if they have any not complaints, but like if they have any issues to troubleshoot, that goes to the customer facing side, and they deal head on with the clients and they onboard new clients. We have the actual clinical genomics workspace team that kind of develops the web interface and makes that better. And then we have the knowledge base team that curates the actual mutations that get fed into our clinical genomics workspace from literature, from FDA approved drugs, from clinical trials, and they use the CAP-AMP ASCO scheme to classify mutations. And then my team is part of product development. We call it product development, specifically assay productization. And our group's goal is to spit out basically as many assays and integrate as many biological assays with our flagship product, the workspace, clinical genomics workspace, so that if we support many assays from various companies like Illumina, Thermo, Illumina is one of our direct partners. They usually advertise their assays and all the reports come through us. So our goal is to just create as many assays that can be integrated into our system. And because if we do that, then we can onboard more clients and also help a larger span of cancer patients. So like at the end of the day, our goal is to create more so that our product is more, can be better suited for different types of assays, and that we can help a larger span of patients and clients. So in that sense, it's less for me. I used to do a lot of data analysis, a lot of programming, a lot of really digging into the science. And for me, it's less of that and more, I do a lot of product management. I'm essentially They call it like a lieutenant product owner. We have a product owner that oversees, we have 4 different teams in product development, but for my team, I'm pretty much like the lieutenant product owner. That product owner gives me the vision of what we want to see done. I make it happen with my team and we figure out how to do it. And it's about integrating those assays into our clinical genomics workspace. And it's less about the nitty-gritty details and really doing like basic science and trying to figure out like why things are happening, or what are the, creating something novel. It's more about creating the product and the vision, and how do we do that in the most efficient manner.
So thank you very much. So I don't know if Ian wants to comment on that, or I would go with the next question.
I think Sohini and Jeanette have hit all the main things. I think one of the things that I would list is that I believe, and I think from like Sohini in my position, that we're in product, we feel this a lot more. But I think in industry, like work and projects are just way more collaborative. I mean, of course, in labs, you have everyone in the lab putting together and doing the biology, but in industry, when you make decisions, you have to ask the lawyers, you have to ask executive team how much funding there is, you have to ask quality folks if they can make sure that we do it well, you have to ask analysis folks if we can do the computation in a reasonable amount of time, and you have to, talk to managers to make sure that this is fulfilling people's individual priorities in their career development. So I think that's something that's pretty different and can be refreshing. I think the other maybe more flippant thing I'll mention is the availability of money in the industry is super refreshing for some people coming out of the PhD. So, in PhD, where it's sort of like, here's this new method or this new test, like, okay, PhD student, in 8 weeks, figure out how to optimize this, and then we'll do the experiment, right? But in industry, it's very different because you think more in terms of money and salary and stuff. So often the choice is, oh, it takes $1,000 per sample to run this assay that we really want to do. Okay, cool. Can we pay an extra $500 to get it in 4 weeks instead of 6 weeks? Cool, let's do that. So I think that's something that a lot of folks might find refreshing or interesting to get into industry, especially big companies like the Pfizers, the Genentechs, and that sort of stuff. Where they're much more aggressive. They prioritize time way more than cost or labor.
So thank you very much. So I will go with the next question. I'm gonna mix my next question with one of the audience. So first, Aranza asked do you think it's necessary to obtain a PhD degree for applying to a position in industry, or we only require a master's degree? With that question, I will address, my question that is really related with that. So my question is, what are the skills that you didn't acquire or that you acquired during grad school that were essential or are essential for your daily work in a biotech company?
What sort of job? Any job?
Yeah, like any job in the skills you acquired during your grad education that are essential for your daily work at your biotech.
I might speak first. I think for my work, although traditionally, like in the Bay, if you did like a product work for like, a Facebook or a Twitter or something like this, PhDs are really not required. Most people would like to see master's degrees just like every other degree or every other field right now, frankly. But I think in the particular position I'm in, which has a very, very deep science related to the technology of the product, that it's probably maybe not required formally, but almost, you probably see that 90% of the time. And I think that's true for things like the Thermo Fishers, the Agilents, the Illuminas, PierianDx, I think Sohini, right? I'm sure a lot of the product people have PhDs, but I think in that regard, on the product side, that's how I'd see it.
To kind of add on to what Ian's saying, so for my company, it is a small company. There's actually very few people that have a PhD in my company. So most of the scientists do have PhDs. And as Ian was saying, if you're higher up, a lot of the product managers, some of them have PhDs, not all of them. I think it just depends where your entry level you want to start at. If you have a PhD, you're going to get a higher position with a higher salary. But if you don't have a PhD, you should, if you have a lot of experience without the PhD, that could also land you somewhere higher. But I think really having the experience and the PhD to put along with it, and also I guess the skills that you acquire throughout your life, those combined will put you like at your starting point. And in terms of different skills that really helped in grad school that I picked up, that really helped me for my job, because I do have a team lead job. I would say communication. Oftentimes you'll see in the development and the product development department, and if you're working with hardcore developers, that people are very much into what they do and cannot communicate. I think I find that a big issue among developers I work with is just that people don't know how to communicate or are not, but that is such an important skill to have. And if you are a developer and you can communicate and talk to different parties of people that aren't in your skill set and gain and have like a bigger picture, be able to manage, those are all skills that I picked up in grad school, just managing. When I was a postdoc, I would manage grad students, manage different things and planning, and also just presenting and communication. Those are all skills that I picked up in grad school that were very helpful for me to get the position, the type of position that I have.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So yeah, answering the first question about, do you need a PhD in industry versus a master's degree? I think part of the answer to that is it depends on what company you work for, and also to Sohini's point, it depends where you want to start. So I think because there are so many PhDs in places like San Francisco and Boston, it's easy for companies to find PhDs. And, and if they have the choice between hiring a PhD and hiring a master's, someone with a master's, they're probably going to pick someone with a PhD. And I think that's probably especially true for smaller startup companies, and maybe not necessarily as true for larger companies, but at least for my company, so Siolta is 9 people right now, and 7 out of the 9 have PhDs. And I think because we're just starting out, we're actually already in the clinic as far as, we're doing clinical trials, but we're also doing a lot of research and development, working on other products. And so my boss has sort of talked about this a lot lately, but at this stage, we need a lot of people that can sort of figure things out on their own. And I think that's one of the big skills, one of the most important skills you get from a PhD is, you're sort of on the cutting edge, and maybe no one else has done this before. So you got to read the literature, you got to figure out how you're going to do it. You got to talk to the right people. So sort of that like motivation and like know-how, and sort of treading in waters where you're, not as familiar, but being able to figure it out and like getting on top of everything, I think is, it's something that sets PhDs apart. Whereas, maybe 5 years down the line, we'll have, we'll know more what we're doing. We'll have another product in development, and we'll be doing sort of, more repetitive things, or we'll have more developed pipelines where, we don't need as much sort of innovation and development. And maybe at that point, we would hire people with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, so on. And yes, as far as skills that have been useful from my PhD, it's pretty much the same. Like I think self-motivation and being able to manage my time and plan what I'm going to do and prioritize what I need to do. Because I don't have someone telling me like, oh, today you're going to do this and this and this. I sort of have to like plan my time and plan my week in order to get things done by a certain deadline.
Thank you very much.
I have a question for Sohini. I wondered if she could paint a little bit more about like what communication means. I think when I was, through my PhD, I was like, I give lab meeting really well and people ask good questions and it seems to go well. Like I'm good at communicating, right? But as I was exposed to this medtech incubation stuff and here in industry, I learned that there's, it's different, the type of communication. I was wondering if Sohini could talk a little bit about that.
Right now? Oh, I can talk about that. Yeah. In terms of communication, for me, it's like on my team, you have different expertise, right? So on my team, I have a bioinformatician, a software developer, a QA specialist, and then on top of that, you have different departments, and then you have my product owner. So being able to communicate in a way that different types of people can understand it, like making sure it's not too technical so that, software engineers that don't have that background can understand it, but also just being able to be able to communicate with other departments, like the customer facing department versus the different teams, and also being able to communicate with the product owner, understanding his vision, and then making sure you don't change that vision, but also carrying out, like communicating that to the team. So I interact with my product owner almost on like a one-on-one basis, but I have to take that information and information from other teams and disseminate it to my team and making sure I don't lose anything, part of that vision, anything that anyone's communicating to me. And also just as a scientist, there's a lot of things jargon that I know that other people may not know, and also just being able to communicate that. And then when I do training, I do a lot of training sessions when we have a product. We release a product, I'm in charge of training the whole company wide about that product and being able to, communicate during that as well, making sure everyone understands what the product provides and that kind of thing.
I'm sure you spend a lot of time being diplomatic too, as opposed to just communicating facts and tasks.
Yes. There's a lot of like drama that happens in the company and like having to deal as a team leader, like all the different issues that come up, how to do that, like Ian said, in a diplomatic way and being very professional about it. And also like, I have to check in with my team members, like, are you guys doing okay? Like emotionally, like, are you okay? Do you have enough workload? It's almost like a mentorship thing, but also being able to disseminate if someone does have an issue to go to being able to escalate that and go to a higher level person in a professional way.
Well, thank you for the answers, and thanks to Arantxa for the question. Hope that I pronounced the name right. I would like to ask if you could give one advice to early career biotechnicians or grad students. What would you do? What would you say?
Go, Jeanette, you.
I think so I'll start with maybe not early career, but I'll start before that. If I were to give advice to someone, that's still in grad school, it would be, I think most importantly, to sort of discover what's out there. So, doing things like attending this panel and, learning about other careers other than academia, or just like when I was in grad school, I took sort of a career explorations class and we had to do informational interviews with people. And I think that was super informative because there were, you know, all these careers and even companies that I didn't even know existed. And you know, you don't know about it until you learn about it, right? So I think just sort of familiarizing yourself with what else is out there other than academia, if you're interested in the biotech world, and just know that everyone's experience is a little different. You know, it's completely different working for a big company like Genentech or, you know, even Pfizer versus a smaller startup company. And then even every startup company is going to have a different culture. So I think just sort of exploring your options. And also, you know, towards the end of your graduate school career, and once you start looking into, you know, if you land a job that you're excited about, I think it's really important to try and find a mentor, you know, whether that's your boss or, you know, someone else, could be your neighbor, you know, someone else in the same building as you, just to sort of keep the, to number one, be inspired, and also just like stay connected with other people, either in your field or in a related field. And I'm trying to think what else. I would say probably do your research, which I don't know if I need to tell this crew that, but do your research as far as like, you know, in addition to doing informational interviews and that sort of thing, to like explore what positions are out there. You know, once you, if you find a position that you like, you know, look at similar positions to know like what's the salary, you know, what's the typical career trajectory of this particular position. Just so you can, you know, when you start to have conversations about employment or whatever, you have more knowledge and more like a solid ground to stand from, if that makes sense.
I agree with everything Jeanette said. It's good. The one thing just want to highlight, I think Jeanette touched on it a little bit, is understanding what kind of work culture you want to be a part of, like company culture. And I think, as she said, it's important, like if you have previous grad students that have graduated and they work in companies, to really just stay in touch with them. I think personal connections is a good way of getting into a company. That's how I didn't really touch on this, but that's how I got my job. Is we had a previous person in another lab at WashU that now worked at the company, and she referred me, and I kind of talked to her, and that's how we got my CV in. But it's important. I think personal connections are important, but also like talking to those people, understanding what kind of work culture they have. I think it's really important to be happy where you work, aside from what you're doing, but like that you're around like-minded people in a similar culture. Like if you want to be in a big company or in a small company, or do you want to be in like a tight, close knit, that very friendly, or kind of the company that just works a lot, and understanding really that work-life balance, because you do want to be happy in your job. And I know, like for my company, I was very fortunate to find a work culture that really speaks to me in terms of work-life balance and being very supportive of each other. And also, I like that it's a startup, it's a new company, it's very new. You get to guide, kind of steer the direction of the company. So I think those are important things to think about, aside from the exact work that you're doing, like also thinking about what's going to make you happy and what kind of environment you want to be in.
Great stuff here to follow up on. One thing, you know, assuming you've done your research, that you're exposed to a lot of diverse things early on. I think for me, something I really took to heart during my PhD that I think has served me well going into industry is that, you know, you're really managing your own PhD and you're managing your PI to help you get that PhD. It's not this thing where the PI is managing you. You know, it's not like undergrad where you take Calc 1, then Calc 2, then Calc 3, or, you know, MCB 1, MCB 2, genetics, so on. So, you know, if earlier on you're like, I think single cell sequencing is like the future, then like, you know, try to incorporate it into your PhD. You know, really be aggressive about understanding what are the technologies and skill sets that are going to lead to biology in the future, and try to incorporate that as much as possible in your PhD. If you really know that you want to design experiments as opposed to being at the bench, then like really focus on getting involved with a lot of different projects and discussing science and reading tons of paper. But I think the more that you take an active role in your PhD, I think the more success in the long run, whether that's discovering science or building skills or finding jobs. I think you'll find you'll have a lot of success in that.
Thank you very much for all your comments. So I will go with the next question. So so my question is, how are tasks designed and delegated in a company? For example, in a lab, like your PI and you brainstorm on a project together and you execute a project. How is this different from a biotech? So, and how free you are, I think, to pursue a goal. If you have an idea, is there a way that you could implement your idea to get or to achieve the goal?
I think probably you'll find in industry the scope is way narrower, and scope is like the term du jour in product, but what it basically means is like, what are the set of challenges, or what exactly are we trying to break, and what are the sort of like sidelines or guideposts that we have to stick in. And so when you're you know, a scientist, you know, at Pfizer, it's going to be probably hard to like convince someone that this one surface receptor should be interrogated to see if it's a drug candidate. And when you're doing immunology or something like that. But if it's sort of like within your domain of expertise that you're hired to know, then of course you're going to be the first one that your company is going to go to. So I think it really depends on the scope, but also the business goals. And so I think academia, you know, computer science or biology is all about fundamental science, discovering new science, new phenomena. And unless you're like on that track at Pfizer, the science postdoc track in these big companies, often that's not the work you're doing. It's about, you know, how do we really figure out a really consistent way to grow T cells, you know, or what is a really consistent way to measure this physiology, which is very important when we go to clinic, you know, in vivo. What is a really good mouse model that describes well this phenotype we care about, right? Like you probably won't get a Nature paper on a mouse model unless it's like cystic fibrosis, that doesn't really exist. But that scope is just going to be like so much narrower and so much about, I think, applied science than fundamental science.
To kind of piggyback off of that, in terms, so I guess each company is different in terms of how, I guess you're asking, how do you come up with tasks? How do you delegate tasks? That kind of thing. But a word that you'll probably hear, and a lot of companies use this, they have different methodologies of how they go from start to finish on a project. It's called Agile or Scrum. So Agile is a method of how you come to completion to a release. And the Agile methodology is kind of, you time box out different, they call them sprints. So every like 2 or 3 weeks, you come up with like an incremental releasable product. And within that time box sprint of 2 or 3 weeks, or however long your company wants to do it or your team wants to do it, you plan for that chunk of time, and you come up with tasks. So you come up with a goal, like a goal, this is what I want to release at the end of the 3 weeks. You come up with that goal, and then you sit down with your team. So your product owner will give you that kind of the priority items that need to happen for a major release, like your big release. And then from there, you might choose a few of those items for your individual 3-week or 2-week sprint. And then when you sit down with your product owner to figure out the priority, the team then has the liberty to kind of organize how you're going to complete those backlog items that are important for your release. So it's like the high level goal in our company is set by the product owner, which then comes to me, and I work with the team to figure out what are the releasable increments that we're going to do. Basically, how we do it is very flexible. So the question of flexibility and what tasks, normally the product owner is like, this just needs to happen at the end. Now you figure out how to do it. What tasks you need to do, how you delegate is all we decide on the team itself, and we do it in those sprint increments every 3 weeks. So it's like, we do have to look at the big picture, but we usually zone in and focus every 3 weeks, and we have a new goal. So for my company, because it is a small company, I find that there is a lot of flexibility in terms of creating new ideas. And also it depends on your position in the company and where you start. If you start in like a team lead position or a scientist position or a product director manager position, I think you have a lot more flexibility in terms of bringing in new ideas, process improvement, really guiding the shape of the company and having input into that. And I think the question of whether a PhD is necessary or not, I feel like with the PhD, you gain a certain level of, not respect, but like a certain level of standing in your company to be able to bring forth those ideas. And whether it's a PhD or just a lot of experience, I think you'll have more flexibility to bring new ideas and really shape how the tasks get done.
So at my company, I think Schillebeeckx is probably a little different from PierianDx and Cofactor. And Schillebeeckx is probably a little closer to the, PhD model where, we have a CEO that sort of deals with our, bigger picture, our financials, where we're going to get our money from, our budget, also like bigger picture, long-term clinical trial type stuff. And then we have our CSO, so, Chief Scientific Officer. And he sort of would be like the PI equivalent, talking to different people about the projects that they're working on, brainstorming together to figure out how they're going to tackle it, the best way to tackle it. And at my company, there's sort of like 2 categories of projects, I would say. So one has to do with our clinical program. And so we're going to be entering phase 2 trials in 2021. And, that's a huge focus of our company. And so a lot of things related to that clinical trial are, we need to answer specific questions. For example, we want to have specific immune endpoints so we can know the effect of our live biotherapeutic on the immune system. And so then, we have this question. So then we turn to our immunologist and ask her, okay, we need immune endpoints. Like, what should we look at? And so she's the expert immunologist. So, so she decides, which methods she wants to test, and, maybe does some experiments, comes up with an answer, goes back to, our CSO, our CEO, they go over it. And that sort of, we're a small team, so, and we have sort of experts in different areas. So we leave it up to the experts to decide which methods they want to use and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you have to answer a very specific question. But sort of the other half of our company is more research and development. And so, we're still doing preclinical studies. We're looking for other indications for our lead candidate, live biotherapeutic. We're also looking at, making new live biotherapeutics with different microorganisms. So that's a little more exploratory, and less of like, okay, we need an answer and we need to move on. It's, it's more, oh, like, let's see where this takes us. So maybe more similar to a PhD in that sense.
Thank you very much. So I will give the word to Giovanni.
Yes, thank you. So I think maybe last question. I would like to ask, what new career opportunities do you expect to see in the biotech industry from now on, for the next few years?
I think look at who's IPOing right now. Who's having, IPO is initial public offering. It's like when a company gets shares, but, liquid biopsy is taking off. Guardant is the big poster child there. Single cell, I have my reservations about in the clinic, it being deployed, but, I'm sure people thought about that in next generation sequencing. And now that's the core technology of Sohini's company. I think seeing machine learning deployed in the clinic is becoming much more of a reality now. People are much less spooked about AI, and clinicians are more willing to use that as information and make decisions. So I think those are the three things that I would recommend. Oh, can I say cell-free? Cell-free.
That's funny. I was about to say the cell-free part. Yeah, in the cancer field specifically, like cell-free and circulating tumor DNA assays are coming out, and those are really big, as well as like immunotherapy, like cancer immunotherapy. Additionally, big data, that's like a big thing, big data, and being a data scientist, machine supervised learning approaches, machine learning. So I feel like if you're a data analysis or data scientist, that's really hot. People want people that can like do that kind of analysis on a large scale, like that kind of programming, that bioinformatics experience, especially in the field that we're in, precision medicine and cancer. So I think if you can program and you know biology, you're in a good position.
Yeah, I would just echo what Sohini and Ian said. I mean, I think anytime, if you have bioinformatics experience, data analysis experience, I think, it may be easier to find like someone who could program or like a software engineer, but having someone with those skills plus an understanding of the biology is much more rare. So I think, yeah, if you can combine those two skills, like, knowledge of a specific field, biological field or whatever, plus, the sort of data wrangling, data science, bioinformatics skills puts you in a unique position.
Also, my company is looking for very young, talented, straight out of the grad school type people. So feel free to contact me if anyone's looking for a job. We will gladly accept resumes.
So yes, I think that would be our last question. I don't know if anyone in the audience have any more questions. So in the meantime, I just have one question, and this will be directly to Jeanette. And as you mentioned before, you work in the PhD with mice, like at the beginning, and at the end you ended with humans. At least for me, all my project is basically on mice. So how, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage if I want to move on to, a company, but that mainly works with humans. Like, do you think that is a disadvantage? Like, I have all my life been working with animals and not at least with human samples.
No, I don't think that's a disadvantage, because I mean, every company that, eventually wants to have some sort of drug or like work with a human population. I mean, I guess if you're like strictly analyzing human data, maybe you don't need a mouse model as much, but anytime you want to have a drug or any sort of therapeutic, you typically need a preclinical model before you move forward with your new drug application. So I definitely don't think that's a disadvantage. If you could get experience with clinical samples or clinical data, that would be great. Because I think anytime you have experience with both, that's always good. But a lot of times what you're analyzing at the end of the day from a mouse experiment, it would be similar to what you're analyzing from a human population. So I think it's still valid, relevant experience.
Yeah, I think in closing, thank you all for the really insightful advice and comments. I think I learned a lot myself too. Very more interesting than some of my current meetings. In closing, I think, there's so many spectrums of things, and I feel like in academia, we're stuck in the bubble a lot. So is there something that, we haven't touched on, but you really want to provide advice to, whether that's postdoc, grad students, undergrad, any researchers working in academia, anything that we have left out that you really want to add? And when you think about it, also, I guess if you like people to reach out to you, if they're looking for job opportunity, if you don't mind leaving your contact information in the chat, that would be helpful too, for those of you who would like to. Thanks.
I think one thing that, I don't know, I feel like a little bit, I'm lecturing from the outside because I'm computer science, it's different, but one of the things that I think is still sort of weird, I think mostly in PhD academia, is this idea that industry is the alternative career path. And I think WashU, a place like WashU, it's very progressive and not as much. But if you look at the numbers, like 9 out of 10 PhDs are going to industry. They're not going to academia. So I think the sooner that is apparent, I think the sooner that it becomes easier to start focusing on things that are not maybe optimized in sort of academic publishing sort of path, and maybe helps you be more prepared when that 4th, 5th, 6th year comes, that what the next steps are.
I would say my advice would be to have an understanding of, number one, if you want to go into a specific field in industry or in biotech, know what skills would set you apart in that field, and if you can, try to get some of those skills. So one thing that could help is just just searching on LinkedIn, looking for positions, say you want to be a scientist in immune oncology for a company like Jeanette or something. So I would just look on LinkedIn, find a position, scientist in oncology, see what skills they would prefer in their ideal candidate, see if you have those skills, just to get a sense for, what makes you competitive in a specific field. And then I think also having a good understanding of what you're good at and what you can bring to the table, and also what you enjoy doing. And hopefully there's some overlap between what you're good at and what you like doing. And that's sort of like what you're bringing to a new position. But then on top of that, I think having a good understanding of where you want to go, or if there's a specific area you're interested in, and that's something you can try to find in a particular company, in a particular position, that gives you room to grow. So you don't want, if you don't want to exactly match the perfect job description and that's it. You want to be able to grow in that position and learn new things. You don't want to exactly fit what they need. So So I think just having a good understanding of, what makes you happy, what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and, are those skills that people are looking for in a particular field? And then where do you want to go? What are you interested in? How do you want to grow?
To kind of reemphasize what Jeanette said, but I just wanted to add something else to it. How she mentioned look at jobs on LinkedIn, look at the jobs description and skills that you need, and maybe try to gather some of those skills. If data science is something that you're interested in, since data scientists are very are well sought out in this current state, I would say like skills that you should probably work on are like make sure you can program in like Python or Perl or Java or C, have some kind of experience with a programming language. Can you do data visualization, creating pretty graphs on R? Can you do statistical analysis? Can you work in a Linux environment? Can you do like command line on Linux? Those are things that I think are very well sought out for if you're looking for a data science position. And then something unrelated, when you do, I feel like whatever job you end up in, I think in industry, I think it's really important to really voice what you need. I know like as being someone who's new into a job, I've been at my job for like a year. I think it's really important to really talk about what makes you happy, what things you like doing. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, being vocal about that to your direct manager, but also just looking out for yourself and making sure that you are constantly getting what you need in your job. And I think those are hard things to do, especially when you're a new person at your company. And a lot of people can't do it and can't really voice if you're getting overworked or if you don't like something. I think it's really important to voice those concerns, and that's an advice I would give. And no matter if you're new, I think you should be able to do it in a tactful way, but I think it's important for really paving the way and your trajectory in the company.
Well, thank you all, and thanks to Giovanni and Eugenio for hosting. I think that was a really great session. We all learned a lot from your advice. I think especially you talk about having communication skills, cultivate skills to network and talk with people outside of your lab, outside of your department, talk about ways to look into positions and see how the potential fits, and also a lot of other things you shared. And I think for people who are interested in the panelist specific companies or positions, you can reach out to them. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks, Giovanni.
Thank you.
See you.
Eugenio.
It was I learned a lot here. I learned a lot.
Yeah, it was very good for me as well. It is very good for me to have